Untitled TRaCE McGill Bicentennial event. Bienvenue à tous et à toutes à cet événement spécial du bicentenaire de McGill. We are honored to welcome back three of our most remarkable PhD graduates who have made their mark in the last decades. TRaCE McGill is a project from graduate and postdoctoral studies that set out to track recent PhDs who graduated from McGill between 2008 and 2018, to report on where they are now, to connect them with each other and current students, as well as sponsor exchanges of knowledge. It is important to acknowledge that McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site for meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. McGill honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which it is located. We are sorry we cannot welcome you in person today at McGill. We are very happy to host this virtual event, which has been awarded Virtual Sustainable Event Certification by the McGill Office of Sustainability. Before we start, I also want to mention that you are most welcome to ask questions to our panelists via Twitter or via email. Vous pouvez poser vos questions en français ou en anglais. You will find the addresses in the comments below. Our Twitter handle is @trace_McGill, and our email is trace@mcgill.ca. It is now my utmost pleasure to introduce the TRaCE McGill Project Director, Professor Paul Yaknin. Professor Yaknin is Tomlinson Professor of Shakespeare Studies at McGill University. He has directed 2 international projects, Making Publics and Early Modern Conversions, and published widely on Shakespeare, Renaissance literature and culture, and also the social life of art. For the past decade, he has also been working on higher education practice and policy. He was the lead author of the white paper on the future of the PhD in the humanities and has published on the PhD in policy options, university affairs, and other journals. He led the project Transforming Graduate Studies for the Future of Canada, which brought together 26 universities to consider ways of making the PhD better. And it is now the 3rd TRaCE project under his direction. Thank you very much, Paul, and I now hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary-Claude. I'm going to introduce the 2 graduate students who will introduce our distinguished guests and then enter into conversation with them. But first, let me do a couple of thanks. Thanks to you, Mary-Claude Felton, who is the project manager of TRaCE McGill, and to Chantal Taubet, who has been the TRaCE manager while Mary-Claude was on leave. I also want to thank the extraordinary team of graduate students from all the faculties across the university who've done the hard work of gathering data, interviewing the grads, and editing the interviews. And a special thanks goes out to Dean of Graduate Studies, Josephine Nalban-Toglu, who's been a champion of the work that we've been doing for at least the past 6 years. Let me introduce your 2 hosts today. Helen Martin is a PhD candidate in the psychiatry department. She was trained as a psychiatric social worker and later was employed at a World Health Organization collaborating center for mental health training and research in South India before joining McGill for her graduate studies. Helen is also the president of McGill's Graduate Student Association of Psychiatry. Hannah Carrell is a PhD candidate in the English department and a past president of the English Graduate Student Association. She was one of the key younger scholars in the Conversions project that Marie-Claude just mentioned. She is the winner of the 2020 Faculty of Arts Graduate Student Teaching Award. Her dissertation, funded by FQRSC, explores representations of women and religious conversion on the Shakespearean stage. It's over to you, Hannah and Helen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul and Marie-Claude, both for those introductions and for organizing such an exciting event. I'll speak for Helen and myself when I say that we're honored to have the opportunity to chat with such incredible McGill alumni today. We want to start by introducing our conversation partners and to share with you a selection of their many accomplishments post-PhD. So I will begin by introducing Yoshua Bengio. Yoshua Bengio is recognized as one of the world's leading experts in artificial intelligence and a pioneer in deep learning. Since 1993, he has been a professor in the Department of Computer Science and Operational Research at the Université de Montréal. He's CFAR's Learning in Machines and Brains Program Co-Director, and he is also the founder and scientific director of MILA, the Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute, and the world's largest university-based research group in deep learning. In 2018, Yoshua Bengio ranked as the computer scientist with the most new citations worldwide, thanks to his many high-impact contributions to his field. In 2019, he received the ACM-AM Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computing, jointly with Geoffrey Hinton and Yann LeCun for conceptual and engineering breakthroughs that have made deep neural networks a critical component of computing. So thank you for joining us, Professor Bengio.
Pleasure.
I'll now introduce Dr. Martha Krieger. So she is McGill University's Vice Principal of Research and Innovation and the Chair of the Governing Council of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in Canada. Professor Krieger has also been the chair of the research committee of the U15 group of Canada's research-intensive universities and is a member of the Research Partnership Committee of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. And she's also the senior research officers of the Association of American Universities. In 2016, the Minister of Science of Canada selected her to be a member of Canada's Fundamental Science Review, and Professor Krieger was named a Chevalier d'Ordre des Palmes académique by the French government, and in 2017, she was appointed a member of the Order of Canada. Professor Krieger has also been an active researcher in the language acquisition across a variety of languages and learners, including monolingual and bilingual Indigenous children learning Inuktitut, Cree, Mohawk, and Algonquin, as well as those learning English, French, and Arabic. Her work has been published extensively in scientific journals and books, and she is the past editor-in-chief of Applied Psycholinguistics, published by Cambridge University Press. She was the vice president of the International Association for the Study of Child Language from 2007 to 2010. I now invite Hannah to welcome our next panelist.
And so our third panelist today is Juan Sebastian Delgado. Interested in new music, improvisation, and multidisciplinary collaborations, Argentinian cellist Juan Sebastian Delgado has conducted a variety of projects that explore the cello in innovative ways in 25 different countries. Chosen by CBC Radio Ideas to feature his artistic research throughout Canada and featured in Virtuoso Brain by the TV program Découverte, Juan Sebastian completed his doctoral studies in performance at McGill in 2017, focusing on contemporary music and nuevo tango. He is a founding member of the up-and-coming Montreal duo Stick and Bow, together with percussionist Christina Marcoux, and he has performed in some of the top music festivals across Canada, including Bach Festival Montreal, Classica 2020, National Arts Centre, Salle Bougie, La Ferie, Classique, Pro Musica, and was selected as Emerging Artist with Jeunesse Musicale de Canada in 2019. Stick and Bow's critically acclaimed debut album, Resonance, in 2019 was praised by Toronto's The Whole Note and by La Scena Musicale. His interest in research and education brought him to create and structure a graduate seminar on the history of the tango at McGill University, and since 2018, he teaches cello at Share the Warmth Foundation. All right, introductions over. I'm going to turn things over to Helen to ask the first question.
All right, so we're all very excited. So let's get started with our first question. So what made you want to do a PhD and why McGill?
Perhaps Professor Bengio, you can start us off.
Sure. I've always been interested in science, and after my bachelor, I had job offers, but I thought it made more sense for me to continue on the research track. I did my undergrad at McGill, so it wasn't really a big decision. Maybe I was a bit lazy. I could have gone to a different university. somehow I was kind of comfortable here in Montreal, and I went out later for my postdoc to New Jersey and Bell Labs, but yeah, I wanted to explore. I guess when I started my PhD, I knew what I wanted to do, but when I started my master's, I didn't really know. And so during the master's, I started reading some of the early neural net papers, and decided this was the thing I wanted to do. That understanding intelligence was something that touched upon my interest in the human and my let's say skills with math and computer science and AI. So it's been a passion since then, and driving my research.
Thank you.
Maybe now, Dr. Krieger, you could.
Yes. So this might be a story of a woman my age. I did a master's applied degree in speech and language pathology, and I worked as a clinician, but mostly a project organizer in the field in rural areas of Quebec, in northern Quebec. And I was a faculty lecturer since the day I got my master's degree in my own department, because I told them, somebody here's got to teach about how children learn language. So when I was 38 and I had 3 children under the age of 5, I had a sort of seminal moment, which led to my deciding to do a PhD. And I'm going to read you something that I wrote for when I got an honorary degree from the University of British Columbia. So from my convocation speech, excuse me, speech pathologists would tell you not to do that. This is some words I wrote about why I decided to do a PhD. I had lost my favorite sister to breast cancer in the 1980s. And after her death, I really felt quite lost and alone. So one day, walking down a street in Montreal, I saw a sign on the wall of a church with a quote by the German writer Goethe that said, "Whatever you can do or dream, begin it. Courage has genius, power, and magic in it." So it was that day, right then and there, that I decided to start a PhD with my 3 children under the age of 5. It wasn't always easy, but as my wise father, who was an academic and university administrator, reminded me, I never told you life would be easy. But I might not be here with you today if I had not found the courage to dream and then act. 35 years later, that quote by Goethe still hangs on my office wall.
That is
Wow,
really
thank you.
inspiring.
True. Juan Sebastian, would you like to follow up on that?
Well, I did a master degree at McGill, and before that I was in the US. I did my undergrad at the Boston Conservatory, which was a very inspiring place. And after spending 2 years at McGill and Montreal, I sort of fell in love with the atmosphere both in Montreal. It's a great dynamic city, very interactive, very multicultural. That for someone coming from abroad is very important. Something that to me has a lot of value. And the music program is extremely versatile and wonderful. I was lucky that I was working with Matt Heimowitz, a world famous cellist who is at the faculty at McGill. And the reason why I thought it was a great way of gaining experience, knowledge, and doing network, of course. But sometimes people ask me, well, why music? And I think, well, there's always room, space for learning, right? Especially from this faculty and interacting with other students who are very talented and just being a university like McGill. So I think to me that was key for deciding to continue my education at McGill.
Thank you so much. And, I think something that comes out of all three of you is the fact that, like, once you've been to Montreal and have been living here for a little while, there's some sort of magic to Montreal that kind of sucks you in, right? Makes you want to stay, keep studying at McGill. I think we all know that the PhD can have both highs and lows. And so we were wondering if you would share with us one of your best experiences during your PhD and one significant challenge that you faced in the course of getting your degree that you remember.
I can start if you want. So the biggest challenge I had was I wanted to do a PhD of a sort that nobody in my department had ever done, and no one in the university had expertise in. So the best part was my department allowed me to have a thesis committee made up of likely people from other departments who had pieces, particularly of the methodology that I needed to do what I wanted to do. But the other best part was 3 women who were at the University of Pennsylvania, UCLA, and one at Stanford, basically agreed to be my guides. And I could talk to them whenever I wanted to, and they really helped me do it. And my thesis committee was very appreciative to them because they provided this. So this flexibility was wonderful for me. The difficulty was trying to find money for this because I didn't have a supervisor who had this kind of money. But we did discover that the Sick Children's Foundation in Toronto, part of that renowned hospital, would support a PhD study for $25,000. So that's what I used to do the research I did in Arctic Quebec with the Inuit.
Thank you so much.
I can go on because actually there are some parallels here. So my main challenge was also that the subject I chose, no one knew about in my department or anywhere in Montreal. And so, well, first of all, it wasn't obvious how to pick a supervisor, but I went with Renato De Mori, who didn't have a lot of expertise in neural nets, but he was interested in applying them for speech. That was his expertise, and he had good funding, and I was lucky enough to be receiving an NSERC master's and PhD scholarship. So my studies were paid. I was free for him. And the thing that saved me really from the isolation is going to conferences and meeting like-minded people. So NeurIPS was in its early days, and it was a very small conference then, like a couple of hundred people. Now it's like 16,000 or something crazy. And I met, and I was a very shy young person, and but I managed to make contact with a few colleagues, mostly also francophones from France, some from France and some in the US, who later became a very important support network, and a little group that has worked together, and I collaborated with since then, including Jan Lequin, that's gotten the Turing Award with me. So that isolation has forced me to reach out to people around the world, and enlarge my circle. And and those conferences became my home. It was a great experience. And then inside, the other thing I want to say that's positive as a grad student was there was a group of like 5 or 6 other grad students in my lab, and the working together like this is something that I hadn't known as an undergrad, where you do your homework and your thing pretty much alone, or maybe groups of 2. It was like a little family where we help each other and we share things and we discuss and we work in the same place. This is an experience that has meant a lot to me, and that I tried to create for my own students later. Thinking of the lab as a kind of family for grad students, especially if you think about foreigners who are coming here and don't have any friends. So it's a like little local support network that's very important.
Yes, absolutely. As an international student who came here and moved to Montreal, I was very happy for my PhD cohort. That family vibe, definitely. Juan Sebastian?
Sure, it's kind of funny. I think with the three of us, we sort of find the same issue about choosing a topic that was a bit difficult. It was sort of the same thing to me. So that perhaps was a challenge, finding the right guidance. But on the other hand, McGill also showed to me that they were very open. They trust me in a sense that, okay, here we're giving you the tools. Now you go ahead and find your own path, find your own ideas, something meaningful, something to say that it's coming actually from you, which I think is a big challenge. When it comes down, to a lot of PhD students, and some of them, they arrive with one idea in mind, and after 2 years they switch ideas and topics. So in that respect, that was challenging, but was great, because I felt like that they were giving me this sense of trust in terms of finding my own voice as a researcher in a way. And perhaps one of the challenges was that my training as a musician was very focused on the performance aspect, and then you of course you have experience as a researcher in the master's level, but it's not as deep as in a PhD. And then there were moments that I felt like I was navigating alone, because I had to balance these two worlds about the performer aspect, which is the action, right? And the research component, which is very important, because the research informs, in a way, the performance aspect of what we do. But sometimes, the faculty also was a bit divided. You work with some like world top class performers who are very inspiring, but perhaps are not the best, researchers. And then you work with faculty who have done a brilliant career as a researchers. And finding that balance, I think that was to me, and I think I to a lot of my friends and colleagues that were doing a doctorate in performance, a bit challenging.
All right. So now that you've expressed all these kind of different experiences that all three of you have experienced, both at McGill as well as in Montreal in general, how did you transition into the job market after your PhD? So, how did you go from a student to becoming an employee?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been an employee.
Employee
technically,
or employer?
Technically, I am an employee, but as a professor, I feel like I'm on my own, and it's like I have a little startup that continuously, I have to go and find money for and recruit all the time. So no, I pretty much stayed in academia. So the transition, I think, they're difficult. Even that transition is not obvious. It can be a very competitive job market for faculties. But it went well for me. I would say the hard part was going from the single-mindedness of the PhD student and then postdoc to the crazy multitasking of being a faculty.
Are you telling us it gets more chaotic?
Yeah, and it only got worse as I now I do 50 different things in parallel in my life, and it's just crazy. Don't do it.
Professor Krieger, would you like to respond?
Okay, well, so remember that I had a practical career and I taught for many years before I did my PhD. So I was very experienced at teaching. But I actually created my own position at McGill. And this is how that story went. And it's an interesting story. I was on a government task force to figure out manpower needs in speech pathology for the province. And I said to them, well, we can't it turned out we needed many more speech pathologists. So I said, but we can't do that without more professors. So they were looking at, I discovered they were looking at putting 4 professor positions into the University of Montreal, specially funded professors, something we don't really know about. So I happened to have a country place in the riding of the man who was at the time the Minister of Education, a man named Claude Ryan. So I drove past his riding office one day, noted down the phone number, and called him. And you have to remember, I didn't even have an office at the time. At the time, I was a PhD student.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him up and I said, listen, I live in Comté d'Argenteuil, and I hear that you're going to put 4 positions in speech pathology at the U of M. And then I told him something that he never figured out the math of. I said, you know, they have a 5-year program, bachelor's plus master's. McGill, we just do masters. So we can put people in the market in 2 years, whereas it takes them 5 years. But of course, they had the same master's students as we had ready to graduate. And I said, look, it sounds to me like you're buying a house without seeing 2 properties. So in the end, McGill got 4 positions, and I got one of them because they landed exactly when I finished my PhD. And I agree with Joshua, the single best skill you need for this kind of career is multitasking.
That is a phenomenal experience that you've shared, almost creating your own position.
I did.
So, yeah, that is amazing. Yes. I think PhD almost does train you for that, you know, because you develop your own project and everything. So, yeah.
You have to be daring. You have
Yes.
to be unexpected, frankly.
Yeah,
I think that's what I'm hearing from all of you, right? Doing something at your department isn't used to supporting, making outside networks, creating your own positions.
Exactly. I think that's like a common theme that's coming around. That's the courage and, you know, having that daring attitude to go forward.
So can I add something here? So yes, being daring helps a lot. In fact, I would say more generally having self-confidence. And it helps in academia, it helps in many areas, but I'm not sure if it's a good thing. So I think there are a lot of good researchers, for example, who don't have a lot of self-confidence, and they don't manage to get these positions, not because they don't have the skills, but if you're not good at selling yourself in science, it's very difficult to break through. So I think we should find ways to make it more inclusive for people who are not as outspoken and don't speak for themselves as much. I think we would gain a lot as a society.
Yeah, I think certainly. And I want to invite Juan Sebastian for you to tell us about your transition as well from PhD to job market to where you are now.
Well, again, I mean, I think I totally agree with like Joshua and Martha said before. And, you know, again, I mean, the world of the arts is a bit, difficult, of course, but a bit narrow too, because, I mean, if I'm honest, you could be an excellent performer, but the job market is very limited. It's just a reality. And we saw also with the pandemic, you know, how much the arts suffer all over the world. Lack of incentive, lack of money and all that. But I totally agree with you. What you were saying, that you have to find your own path, and it's not enough to be a good cellist or pianist or whatever you are. You see great performers winning top competitions, and they go nowhere with their careers. And so in a way, it's being open and where we're standing right now, and because also the arts and the music keeps on evolving, and you have to adjust and adapt and think differently. Even though we're trained as a classical musician and I play that repertoire and all that, but I have to say that most of the opportunity that I got, I found them in a way myself. Of course, I worked really hard, and you know, I did all my studies, but like you guys were saying, I mean, like the graduate seminar at McGill was something that I structured. I even proposed it, and they really liked it, and they said yes. I mean, you're welcome to do it, which is great. But a lot of great opportunities that I had were coming from my own ideas and incentive. So in a way, I mean, going back to your question, transition, already when I was doing my PhD, I was having a lot of like professional opportunities in terms of performing, researching, connecting with people. So I continue in that direction, and whenever I finished, I already had like a couple of things line up for me to work on. So it felt much more natural in a way, which to some people in music is a bit hard, because you practice a lot, you work, and one day, okay, you're a professional musician. Like, okay, what do I do now? I only know how yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to follow up on this thread that's coming out, one about sort of needing to be a go-getter, right, who puts on kind of an air of self-confidence, but also what you brought up, Professor Bengio, of saying like that's not necessarily a possibility for everybody. That's not always jiving with everybody's personality. And something that I think that the TRaCE project has done really well with interviewing lots of PhD students and bringing forward so many different stories is that it's helping people realize all of the different skills we acquired during the PhD, and helping people hopefully, right, understand how to better market themselves if you don't have that kind of charismatic, natural kind of self-confidence. I'm going to go out and do this and make my own position or really advocate for myself. So I'm wondering if you guys can speak to some of the skills, I think in the corporate world, they call them the soft skills, right? That you see yourself that you acquired during your PhD outside of just gaining really kind of specific field knowledge. What are some of the other skills that you learn while you're doing a PhD?
Well, because I did a PhD in Inuit communities, I had to learn to listen, and I had to learn to negotiate, but in the best sense of the word, figure out what was meaningful for them and what would be doable for me. So I think that I came away from that experience with a different recognition of what it means to not just drive home your own agenda, but also have to recognize and value other people's agendas. And I'd say that. I mean, I came with a lot of administrative skills. And, to make clear something that Joshua hinted about, look, I came from an academic family. I came from a family where my father went from one senior admitted position to American universities. So a lot of this came to me with a lot of background experience. And I recognize that put a sort of silver spoon in my mouth. And everybody doesn't have that. And so, I guess the other thing is, since that was so particular to my world, just seek help in mentoring. There was a wonderful group of women mentors at McGill, and a woman named Rose Johnston, who was in the first chair and frankly, one of the only chairs in a biomedical department at McGill, said to me once, look, you have a lot of skill for senior admin, but you will never be a dean of medicine because you don't have an MD. So you better become the dean of graduate studies at McGill. And a year later, I did. So just keep trying to access people who can help you figure out good pathways.
Let me tell you about a different kind of thing that I really enjoyed and learned a lot about during my grad studies. So I had been a student for most of my life before that, and taking classes and being told what to do, right? And suddenly I was given all that freedom. Something that you may lose later, even as a faculty, because we're taken by so many things to do. And but really, to succeed in research, you have to grab that opportunity of exploring in a direction that's, something coming from you. And because I was so isolated intellectually, especially initially, I had to kind of find things out by myself. And the nice thing about the PhD is, it's like when you, at least in the early years, you feel like you have infinite time to complete it. So, oh, that's far away, right? So you can go on very challenging long-term goals, while eventually near the end, you realize, oh, gee, I need to actually do something. No, and I did. I was very productive, but really not trying to publish papers, but trying to pursue some kind of dream and going after it. And the rest just came out as a side effect. And by the way, I see this with a lot of sadness today. I don't know if things have changed. I think they have. There's a lot more pressure to publish in grad studies compared to when I was a grad student in the late 80s. And that pressure to publish is hurting what science needs the most, which is sort of kind of mental space and freedom to explore and take the time to think deeply about things. But anyway, that's where I honed that skill. I came from a family that gave my brother and I a lot of freedom. So, it didn't start from zero. But having all these years to just think about something I enjoyed and explored is a gift that may come only once in a lifetime at the time of the PhD. So, we should really take that opportunity.
Yeah, totally. And to me, I think one thing that was very important also, because again, I'm going back to what I was saying before, that sometimes our mindset, I think, is the same for a researcher, a musician. We spend a lot of time, we lock ourselves up and we practice and we do research for hours and hours. And sometimes we lose that connection to the real world, the reality. And interacting with people, for instance, in the music department, having to conference and presentations and talking and getting in front of an audience, not as a musician, but also as a researcher, trying to explain a new idea or an old idea, but with your own ideas. I think that was extremely valuable because later on you gain, I think that's what I think Joshua was saying a bit, that freedom that you acquire during all those years of doing your own research. And in our case, we're doing research both with our instrument and without our instrument. So I think that process of getting to understand your work and getting to analyze, sometimes overanalyze certain things and practice and go back to it and talking to your colleagues and friends and is extremely valuable, I think.
And I'd like to add something about what I said. So one very important ingredient that made all this possible for me is that our governments are funding curiosity-driven research. It is so important. In many countries, there is funding for research, but it's very directed. And I mean, some directed research could be useful. There are strategic issues that our countries need to address. But we need room for curiosity-driven research. And at the time, I benefited from NSERC PhD scholarship and so on. And that gave me absolute freedom. So this is something we need to be very careful to protect in the future. It could easily go away, from one government to the next.
Absolutely. So, all of you have been sharing about, seeking and giving mentorship, as well as the freedom and liberty that comes with it. And of course, Benji, your last point about funding, how crucial that is in order to sustain. So now as more, and also, the various interviews that we have conducted so far as part of TRaCE team, was that more and more PhDs these days, they don't work in academia anymore, although PhD is an academic degree, So after they graduate, so how do you see PhD changing in the years to come?
Well, I had a PhD student who wanted to stop her PhD and go into Bible translating, which was something that might have been needed in certain indigenous communities, and corresponded to her own faith. I said to her one day, to translate the Bible is a pretty big project. Maybe you better finish this project and show that you know how to do a big project. And then you can take that knowledge of doing a big project, how you time it, how you break it into pieces and complete it over time, how you seek the inspiration for it, and you can apply it to all kinds of projects in the world. So she did. She ended up as an academic, by the way, but I actually believe in this. There are a number of people I know with PhDs who go on to do fabulous projects of all kinds. And they learn to do a project with their PhD. So you can seek many kinds of doors to open with it.
I can see a few things about the job market for PhDs now compared to a few decades ago. I have the impression that, at least in my area, there are a lot more PhDs and a lot more PhD students. And the vast majority of them will find a job in industry rather than in academia. It wouldn't just wouldn't work otherwise. And often the better ones, because in AI currently the job market is there's a huge demand for those skills, especially with a PhD. So that could be good. The kind of work you do in industry varies a lot. With a PhD in computer science, it could be very researchy, almost like in academia, or it could be more applied. And some people, feel much comfortable there, and you can have more impact. There's room for a lot of different ways of using your skills. So there's, even people coming back to academia. I think that has always existed. In many fields, I think having this fluidity between the two worlds of industry and academia is actually very useful in both directions. Of course, we are forming talent, but there are things that are now happening in industry that we can't do in academia because we don't have the scale and compute power and things like this.
Yeah. So what I would say is I'm younger than Joshua and Martha, and maybe having finished my PhD not that long ago, maybe my vision is a bit different. And also, coming from the arts, in terms of funding is always an issue because there are always lack of funding for even large institutions, renowned, historic institutions. But I think what I would say perhaps is we live in a world where nothing is secure anymore. We're as in a year when still in a pandemic, we don't know how our things gonna develop. And I'm bringing this up because it affects a lot the arts. So perhaps you think to yourself, oh, I will have a PhD from McGill, and my career is set. I'll get the best jobs in the market, and I don't think that is true. So I think it will definitely prepare you to be a better researcher, a better musician, a better person. It will definitely serve you to get better skills and open new doors in terms of maybe you're drawn to work in academia, which is fantastic, or you want to be a performer, or you want to be in the more administrative section, in the arts, which is great to have all this background, all this knowledge. But I think that the only advice is that you have to be open. I think you have to keep your own voice, but at the same time, you have to have a foot in reality, because things are changing so fast that for us as artists, for instance, this year, we have to readjust. How do we do virtual concerts, and how do we promote, and how we keep our value and meaning of what we do. So it was almost personal to us to why we do this, what purpose that it serves. And I don't think having a PhD will solve all these issues, but I think it will definitely make you a better, more analytical, in a way, more curious person, and therefore you will have more tools to help yourself for a better future.
Yeah, I think that's an optimistic, vision too, as well, of what the PhD can give you, even if it's not necessarily translating into the academic job of your dreams. I do just want to remind our Viewers who are watching, we're in the final 15 minutes, and so we do welcome questions from you in English or in French to the TRaCE Twitter or to the TRaCE email. But while we wait and see what the community has to say, I just want to continue on this thread of thinking about what the PhD can give us and ask you all what general advice, you're all in different fields, but do you have any general advice for prospective PhD students or for master's level or bachelor level students who might be watching this and wondering, should they go pursue a PhD? And if so, like, what are some things that they should consider when they're trying to make what is a really large decision that can really kind of shape the course of your future? Any general advice?
I think you should do a PhD because of the emotional kind of benefit you might get from doing it, and not because of the diploma, maybe a better job, but that's not even guaranteed that you would get afterwards. So if you enjoy research, which is hard to know before you do it, of course, and that's why the master's is useful. If you enjoy research, then I think that's a really good place to be, to have that freedom. And you also have to be patient. For having supervised a lot of grad students, PhDs, it might take a while before you become the expert in the world in something, because this is what a PhD is about. You have to become the expert in the topic of your PhD thesis, right? And so, it can take a couple of years during which you might feel like you're not productive. But once you reach a sort of threshold of understanding and scholarship, things fall in place, and then your ideas work and they make sense, and others recognize them. And so, yeah, you need a bit of persistence to succeed in the PhD.
So a department chair of mine gave me really good advice. He said, if you're going to do this, do something that grabs you passionately, something you really care about with your gut, because otherwise it could be sort of a tedious task. And my other advice to you, and remember, I had 3 kids under 5. I didn't have a lot of money. I had my Shirk Fellowship. Don't waste a lot of time. So I finished my PhD, learned another language, did field work, took care of my family in 3.5 years. Just get on with it. Like, I find certain people just kind of drag it out and drag it on, probably out of nervousness about what the future holds. So just get on with it, because dragging it out doesn't necessarily improve it. And then never be afraid when you go to your final the defense of your dissertation, because you know more than anybody else about that topic in the room. And I think Joshua was saying that you become the expert in it, and just believe in yourself most of all, and be willing to open many doors. In addition to the industry and the performance that was talked about by Juan and Joshua, there's government jobs. The government really appreciates people with PhDs. There are non-governmental jobs, agency jobs, organizations jobs. There are jobs in publishing. There's a wide spectrum of jobs that a PhD is helpful for. So, keep applying different places and see what it is that really turns you on the most. It may not be academia. It may be something else.
Yeah, basically, I would say the same thing that was already said, but without losing perspective, try to use that time to really explore, experience, and to take that time which is unique in your life, because afterwards you have to, move on and survive and pay rent and do things that we're not trained to do, and life gets on with a lot of issues, right? But I think it's a wonderful time to really dig into something that we love and something we're passionate about, and not a lot of people have this opportunity already to have the chance to be at McGill just an incredible place, and to do a PhD and to get paid. I also had a scholarship. It was not a lot, but I was already feeling I'm lucky, that I could, I don't have to think about paying rent because I have this scholarship. But really, it's a luxury in the world we live in. Like, it's a real. So try to also have fun and enjoy and make friends and live, but try to do something with that unique time, which it might bring you to a better world afterwards. I don't know. Yeah.
You guys have given me a perfect segue to asking my next question, which is about how do you ensure work-life balance? Or do you have any advice for Benji? I see your expression there. So
we're personally hoping you have some advice for us about how to maintain a work-life balance.
Exactly. Yeah, because you have been talking about, how.
Actually, I have something to share about this.
Mm-hmm.
So my first son arrived when I hadn't finished my PhD. And Martha's case was much worse, but for me, it was a shock. And suddenly I couldn't work like 80 hours a week. I had something more important to deal with. So sometimes life forces you into work-life balance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But overall, I have not been very successful at that, especially since my children have left home. I work way too much. It's not healthy. Don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a total failure at it, but I actually don't worry about it. I'm not bothered by not having work-life balance. I never really was. So, and my kids put up with it all and loved me anyway and did well themselves. And, I'd be, I don't know what, I was always working and they always saw me working. I didn't think it was terrible for them. I think the most important thing is to do the things that are important for your health, whether that's mental health or physical health. And it's not something that I'm great at. I have to make a lot of effort to stop working because I love my work. That's the great part of it. So it's hard to stop. So you have to discipline yourself to stop, take time for your body, take time for your mental health.
Yeah, I would like to reinforce this. For many years, people were asking me about my work, and I was saying, "What work? I'm just doing, I'm playing, and somehow I'm getting paid for it."
I think when you find that is like the best moment. I think that Juan Sebastian is having some internet issues. I see that he's dropped out of our meeting, but perhaps I'll ask one final question before we turn things back over to Paul and Marie-Claude, which is going off of your point, Professor Krieger. I want to make a Post-it note that just says "get on with it" and post it above my laptop, because I am in the kind of deep woods or trenches of dissertation writing. And so my question here would be about, other general advice that you and Professor Bengio and Juan Sebastian, if he comes back, have for those later stage PhD students, the ones who might be, kind of feeling a little bit lost with their dissertation writing or in the lab, or those who can just sort of finally see the light at the end of the tunnel as they're approaching their defense. I know you had mentioned, Professor Krieger, not being afraid of the defense, but I'm wondering if you have anything else to say to the PhD students who are getting ready to kind of emerge out into the world.
Look, I think it's a very stressful time. I used to have nightmares of being in a car and driving down a road and it's starting to slide and I couldn't control it. I want to know where the road was. It was Simpson between Pine Avenue and Penfield, a little curvy downhill, and I just start going down there and I couldn't control the car. So it's a scary time. You're going to be judged on this dissertation. Half the time you don't know if you've got a job or not out there, or what kind of job it will be. So, I mean, I think practically, when I was the Dean of Grad Studies, I used to say, make sure your supervisor will track with you. Make sure you set up something that says, I want to turn in a chapter to you on my thesis, if it's a typical chapter type thesis or a publication, on these regular intervals. You know, I had a daughter, but a supervisor would say, okay, I'll get back to you in 6 months on your chapter. I said, this is unacceptable. You know, you've got to work with people. Go to your grad program director if you're facing that. You've got to work with people who systematically will give you feedback so that you can get this thing ready to move on. And I mean, you certainly can use your peers, you know, the peers in your area to read through things, get them to give you advice on them, whatever. But you need a set of people that will help you keep tracking on some kind of timeline that's realistic and makes sense. And mostly you have to fight this fear of the future and just believe that it's going to work out one way or the other.
Agreed.
And I think there's one more piece of advice I could give. Bernard Shapiro, who was a great principal at McGill, said once to a group of graduate students that I had organized for him to speak to when I was dean, he said, it's not a magnum opus. Don't try to turn it into a magnum opus.
Oh, that is real.
That is very, very real. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would kind of repeat what I said earlier also. After some time in the PhD, you should be the expert on something, and you should trust yourself. You have something in you that no one else has, and you just have to let it out of yourself. You know, allow yourself to write it down, share it, experiment with it, whatever is appropriate. And you have a unique strength, and you just have to allow yourself to take advantage of it to move forward and produce something useful for society. Knowledge.
Yeah. I think that those are strong words to end on. I just want to say thank you both so much, and Juan Sebastian as well, for chatting with us and giving us a little bit of something to laugh about and think about as I know we both are moving forward in the kind of final stages of our PhDs. And to everyone watching, I think I'll invite Paul and Marie-Claude back to make a few final remarks here as we approach the end of our hour together.
I just want to thank you for the extraordinary discussion, and thank you to Juan Sebastian. We lost on Zoom. It was smart and practical and deeply inspirational. Yeshua, you said when you were a student, you took classes and people told you what to do. When you become a PhD, you're a full-fledged adult. People have to listen to you. That's such an important piece of the story of the PhD. Thank you so much for bringing this all to us. Let me turn things back to Marie-Claude.
Yes, I want to thank everyone in turn. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Juan Sebastian, who we lost, as Professor Yaknin just said. Thank you very much, Helen and Hannah, for moderating this event. Paul and I wish you much success in completing your PhD and beyond. I'm sure everything is going to be a great success for you. A warm thank you also to our audience. Please remember to check out our website, where you will find more stories from PhD graduates, as well as our executive report that we just published. You can find the links below in the comments. And please don't hesitate to contact us for more information or to send us feedback about this event. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on our website to receive news about our upcoming events. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future event.